Same thing, we'll go ahead and take the URL, come over to our WAF, and go down to allowed URLs, and add our URL. And create. So with this one, the attack is focused on, again, the parameter input. So we'll go ahead and select, and well, first we'll take note that this is a list of languages. So please choose a language. So this is where we make some assumptions again. So we can go ahead and kind of assume that based upon natural language, that the names of natural languages and spoken languages and written languages more particularly, that it's going to fall within the length of that, within those lengths. So we'll go ahead and do select, and we'll take note that we have a parameter call to default, and the value happens to be the language name explicitly here. We'll go ahead and run Spanish and German, and we'll go ahead and do French too. And each instance we see it has changed with these names. Now, we'll go ahead and take into consideration the longest name of written or spoken languages is 24 characters long. So, with our 23 characters actually for that matter, including spaces. So with that into consideration, we'll go ahead and cap this out to 24. But keep in mind, the parameter we'll be protecting is going to be default. So come on over to our fancy WAF here. And there's our other parameters. So we'll go ahead and do default. No staging. As we saw, there is no empty value. So we will not allow it. And because in this case, it was a singular lookup, and usually this is kind of a singular function, so we'll not allow repetition. Back to what we mentioned earlier, we'll go ahead and go 24. And for our meta characters, we'll go ahead and similar situation to submit. Now, because language names can contain spaces, we'll go ahead and allow that, but there's no excitement. So we'll go ahead and disallow that. Hash symbol, because what we saw with submit, we'll go ahead and make the assumption there is the potential that this could be present. Actually, even though, as we see here, it's not. But back to some of the concepts, this is kind of how you take approach on some of your WAF policy design. So we could be super stringent and remove the hash symbol, but in this case, we'll go ahead and keep it allowed. So moving on, we'll go ahead and disallow these. And just for the sake that it is possible, like en-us, en-es, it's fair to go ahead and just allow dash, again, assumptions. But if we want to be super stringent, we could change that. So caret, not a character, tilde, not a character, same thing, D for disallow, and tap through it. Get the rhythm flowing. And tax signatures, again, not enabled. So we will go ahead and create that. And next, well, I mean, ideally, this one will be protected. So we'll go ahead and move on down to XSS reflected. And in this case, what is your name? Bob Jones. and hello, Jim Bob Jones. We can see name up in the parameter. So the name Jim Bob Jones up in the parameter, also appended by the hash symbol. And back again to the point of making the assumption hash is probably something we should just kind of allow by default. That's coming into a little more clarity in the situation, I would say. So this one, we'll go ahead and essentially do the same thing. We'll go over here and protect the name parameter. And back to the email aspect, this one's a little arbitrary just because you could kind of type in whatever you want, but we'll treat it the same as a user ID for the heck of it for the length, but we won't treat it for a user ID in the sense of characters. So we'll give it to 128, and we'll go ahead and disable these. It does need to be populated. Well, not necessarily, because we probably could click submit without it, maybe. Yes. Now, granted, it does have the hash symbol, but we'll go ahead and assume, like the others, it could possibly not be present, future application development intentions. So we'll actually allow the ability this time. Repetition, in this case, singular function, so we will not. Moving on to the meta characters, we'll go ahead and obviously allowing space, could be first name, last name thing, arbitrary, very vague on what is expected here. Oops. We won't move that over here so we don't screw up. And for the sense that you can kind of type in whatever you want. So maybe we want to have it show up with, what is your name? Jim Jones. Nah. How far are you going to get with an exclamation character in an actual attack? Probably not very far. So for fun, for fairness, and looseness, we'll go ahead and allow that one to happen. Hash symbol allowed. Somebody wants to type in their name, like, you know, that'd be a funny one. Jones. Okay, that's fair. So we'll actually allow this. Asterisk, back to the other example with the ID, we'll allow it because it's not super dangerous in this case. Dashes, certainly allowed. It's common in names. So slash, we'll go ahead and allow that too. Colon, not so much. We'll go ahead and disallow that. These characters, certainly not allowed in the case of what we're going for here. So we'll go ahead and disallow that. Carrots are not part of a name, nor is tilde. So we'll go ahead and disallow these. Now, to the other characters we had shown before, because space can be converted to a plus depending on the browser and depending on the client and just a variety of cases. So we'll just go ahead and allow space by default, which is kind of why it's allowed by normal. Comma, not so worried. Period. Same thing with the exclamation. We'll just go ahead and allow it. So we'll just disallow these ones because the question already is there. What is your name? So you don't respond to a question with another question. So it's kind of how we're taking the thought process behind this. But again, can we go ahead and allow a question mark at a future point in time? Certainly. But we're building policies. We're building a framework that maybe we have to tune later. So we'll go ahead and create that parameter. And now XSS reflected here is actually protected. Before we proceed on to XSS stored, we'll go ahead and add our URL again. and make that a wildcard and uncheck those and create. And now we'll go ahead and proceed to XSS stored. So in this case, we have a guest book. Pretty straightforward, very common form input. The key thing is the ability to type a message. So this gets a little more tricky in what we get to do, but not necessarily. So we'll kind of go ahead and start here. Jim Bob Jones is back again. And ooh, uh-oh, I can't type any more characters. So in this case, this web app actually has a fixed limit. Just for visual representation, it's 10 characters. So, okay, the web app actually has an enforcement to the length. This is kind of cool. This means that despite the fact that the web app has the ability to mitigate this on its own, it's still sensible for us to enforce it further on the WAF in itself. So we'll do that. Now, name, we'll go ahead and stick with Jim Bob Jones, but oh, I can't do S anyways, whatever. Now the message, howdy. And there we are. We have an actual limitation. So I'm not totally sure what that is. We could certainly look in the web app in itself, but we'll use this to our advantage. And we'll do a count. So count characters, 50. So we know that the form has a fixed limitation of 50 characters. We'll go and enforce that too. Because keep in mind, this is a limitation designed within the web app in itself. But if I were to use a proxy application such as Burp Suite or et cetera, I don't have those limitations because this is the form input limitation. It's not the actual limitation of what can be sent potentially. Even though the web app in itself may also cut it off, still it doesn't change. We don't know that necessarily for fact without testing it in ourselves. So we'll just go ahead and cut that out as a potential, and we'll mitigate it with the WAF as said. So for the moment, we'll go ahead and sign the guest book, and we'll take a look at our request. So coming through here, see a pretty typical request. You know, we got our headers, we got our cookies, and user agent. So nothing too special there. Coming over here, we see we have the form input for text name, which is Jim Bob Jones, as we saw. And then we have the message. And then finally, we have the button sign of sign guest book. Now, take note, this one actually did this as a form. So, hence why we have the request payload. And hence why the method is a post. We actually have a post body. Now, we'll go ahead and take a look at the actual raw payload. And we can see it's a very standard post body, where it is, for that matter, encoded. Despite what we saw here, it is decoded. But looking through, we have essentially the whole payload. So nothing special to really explain there, except for the fact that this is what's submitted and certainly what can be altered. Now, moving on, we'll go ahead and take a look at our cookies very directly. Nothing super exciting here. Now, we'll go ahead and because we have the ability to also clear the guest book, this means that this is going to cause some sort of interaction. So we may have to protect this parameter too, which we will. Just the question is, what is the parameter? Let's find out. And stuff, clear guest book. Would we like to clear? Yes, we would. Now, the reason why we submitted information is because we don't know necessarily or not if our request would include that information or if it simply would clear. So for the validation, get the full picture, we went ahead and submitted our information. taking a look over here. Oh, wow, actually it is. So it justifies the fact that we'll have to protect it from the context of the clear button as well. But because the parameter names, text name, and MTX message remain the same, the protections it will provide in either sign or clear will essentially be one and the same. But keep in mind, here we have the button clear parameter name and very similar value what we saw earlier, where it was sign guestbook, I believe. So we'll go ahead and work on protecting those now. And we'll come over here to our WAF. And before we really proceed, we'll make sure that we have our URL defined. Create. And again, wildcard. And create. All right, so now that the URL is created, we'll come over here to parameter list and we'll go ahead and create our parameter for this one. Or parameters. So text name, and we will not do staging because it's a singular value. And because of the singular value, we will not do the repeating. But for empty, we didn't necessarily check if you can submit it without it, but we'll go and assume there is a possibility that you can. So we'll go ahead and allow the empty value. So moving on down, we know that we had a fixed limit of 10. So we'll actually go ahead and enforce that because the web app in itself does not allow you to type more than 10. So if somehow magically there's an extra character in there, that means that somehow you're doing something not within the web app form. So justifies our reasoning to go ahead and lock that down to 10. Now back to naming characters. We'll go ahead and allow space as we saw. You know, kind of like the earlier example, exclamation mark. It's not really going to hurt us. So we'll go ahead and allow it. And same thing with the hash because we saw it's pre-populated in some instances. So we'll go ahead and allow that as well. The name could put their brackets in, who knows, asterisk, etc. Not too worried about that. Colon, we'll go ahead and disallow that. Kind of not normal. Question mark, doesn't make sense to allow that. And caret, and same thing with tilde. So rinse and repeat. And there we go. We got our parameter created. Tax signatures not enabled. And we'll go ahead and create it. And take note, text name, lowercase the name. Same thing with submit as we created earlier. Now, as we saw for the message, that was MTX message for the parameter name. Come back over here and see that, MTX message. So go ahead and create that one as well. And because we saw we had a character limitation of 50, we'll go ahead and enforce that as well. And singular message, no repetition. Potential, it could be empty. Sure, why not? Wouldn't be the first time someone signed a guest book registry without a message. So we'll allow that. Staging, we know what we're doing, hopefully. And for the message, well, I mean, ideally, it's kind of anything that you can type on a keyboard. It's a message. So we should allow that, but it is fair for us to enforce certain aspects because, well, we're just going to be security hardened. So we'll go ahead and allow quotes. Makes sense to allow this one. $sign, you know, hey, you're making us a lot of money. Okay, we want to allow you to let us know that. Percent, oh, you just made us a massive percentage of income. Okay. Websites are a cash register to some extent. So money kind of speaks a lot in terms here, especially in the sense of comments. And symbol or ampersand. So of course, ticks, absolutely. we want to allow contractions. So semicolon doesn't hurt to allow this. Now, here's what we're not going to allow. We will not allow the script tags, which is essentially what these equate to. So this allows a lot of mitigation. This is why our ability to protect this from most any attack without without the use of the tag signatures actually will apply and well, do a pretty good job. But can we do better with signatures? Absolutely. And we will, but for the moment in demonstration aspect, no, we will not. We're just going to rely on this. These characters just don't make sense to allow, but because it is fair to allow the ability for the separation of a word, you know, and or maybe they type it backwards, we'll go and allow that. Carrots doesn't make sense, but it's kind of there by default, and maybe someone makes a typo. Tilde, kind of not necessarily a conversational piece in words, but who knows? Could possibly happen, and it's not a very dangerous character, unlike the greater than less than symbol or script tags. So we'll go ahead and keep that allowed. Now, as said, these are now allowed by default because they were previously disallowed. So we're not actually going to set disallow in this case. And tag signatures, again, disabled, so kind of good to go. We'll go ahead and create that parameter. And that pretty much takes care of our store page. Oh, wait, no, sorry. We forgot our button clear and we forgot our assign guest book. So we'll go ahead and create our button clear and we see clear guest book. So that characters is, since we have it handy, clear guest book. 15 characters. So we'll take that into consideration as we create our parameter here. And just to reiterate, button clear, BTN clear. Helps if I type it correctly. And that'll bite you someday too, making a little typo like that. Like, why isn't it working? No, typos. All right, so empty value by design, this is a function, so it does require something to be there by as we see within the application. So we'll actually require it in this case. So we'll go ahead and not allow. Repetition, it's a singular function, don't allow. Now to the value aspect, as we saw here, 15. So we'll go ahead and lock that down to, we'll say 24. Just to, maybe they want to create a few new functions, and it's not going to hurt us to go ahead and extend it a little bit further. Ideally, probably 16 is a little more appropriate, but we'll just kind of roll a 24 to give it a limitation of something, but still be flexible. So we'll roll with that. Now this one, kind of like when we saw submit earlier, we'll go ahead and lock this one down a little bit further. So these characters should not be allowed in the context of what we've seen so far. So no commas. And we'll actually allow a period, who knows, maybe they have a separation here. So disallow. And you may take note, you know, some of these habits may change as you kind of go through it. Like maybe I feel a little bit more relaxed, maybe I feel a little more stringent. Just kind of depends on how you want to take the approach. What really does help though is consistency. So try to keep that in mind. But can you possibly forget as you move along because these things do get pretty complex? Yes. Just make sure you make the appropriate choice, hopefully correctly to begin with. Otherwise, well, I guess you're going to find out the hard way and you got some tuning in your future. So there's our next parameter created. And then now we have the guestbook submit button that we missed a little bit ago. So Jim Bob Joan something, get our guestbook parameter name, and we have button sign. Same context, sign plus guestbook. So we'll go ahead and rinse and repeat what we did for the clear button. And again, BTN sign. Doesn't hurt to double check. And we're gonna require a value, but not allow. And we'll set the same 24. And there we go. Now let's go and set them all to disallow. And no signatures. Create. And effectively, we have just protected this web app as well, or at least this form. Next, we can go ahead and move on to Open HTTP redirect.